All right, let's get this party started. Welcome, students, to Classics 160B1. Meet the Ancients! I, of course, am your professor, Dr. Rob Steffen. And today we are going to finally get into the story of the foundation of Rome. Last time we kind of got right up to the beginning of that, right? What happened prior to Rome showing up on the scene. Today we find Rome ourselves. So let's go ahead and we will turn down the lights and bring down the projector and fire this thing up for lecture 9.2, The Founding of Rome. I know that was the title for the last lecture as well, but we didn't get to it. So now today is indeed the founding of Rome. Let's see what we got on our announcements first. We're going to recap the Etruscans. I'm going to ask you guys what the main characteristics are of the Etruscans. So get your little typey keyboards ready and fire that into the chat soon. And then we are going to get into the story of Romulus and Remus and the founding of Rome. From there, we'll look at Romulus as a prototypical king. So one of the interesting things is that when Rome starts up, it is indeed a monarchy, right? And we'll see that the monarchy and kind of evolution of that monarchy ends up guiding Roman ideology for like centuries and centuries to come. And it all ends kind of poorly with the seventh of the seven kings of Rome. And we will see how we get to that point later today. So let's look at our announcements first. We've got one question in the chat about citations for the reading response. I believe this week you guys are looking at Livy and the history of Rome. And what I want you guys to be able to do citation-wise for that is when you're citing an ancient source, the author goes in as the ancient author, right? So it would be like Livy. And then the title of the text goes in italics, right? The history of Rome or the foundation of Rome or whatever it's called. And then after that, you include any of the additional information, okay? And so if you have a translator, right? If you know who the translator is, you say translated by blah, 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 Zach Feldkamp, right? And then you add the publishing information, Chicago University Press, 2008, right? And the goal there, right? It's not saying that Livy wrote this in 2008. It's just saying that the book was actually published then. So it would be something along the lines of like ancient author and then title in italics, then translator, publishing. Something along those lines. You can check the kind of how to cite an ancient source on MLA, and that should help as well. When it comes to citations, one of the things that I kind of do want you guys to focus on is like, I really don't care too much, like whether you like flip the city and the publisher or it's like exactly MLA or APA, right? The goal of these things is right? I want you to be able to show us that you're actually drawing on specific information from the text, right? You are showing us that like you are not making up some crazy response just out of your own imagination. You're like basing it on something from the text. And then two, you're giving credit to the people who actually wrote those texts, right? So kind of keep in mind first and foremost the idea behind it. Try to be consistent in the way you do it. This is one way. You can look up, that might not even be the exact MLA way. You can look up the MLA way if you want. But there you go. That's one way to go ahead and cite these things. Good reminder there. Don't forget to do the reading response this week. I know it's like been a while because we were like watching movies and having midterms, and it's been a while since you've actually like done some reading and written anything about it. But this is super cool. What you guys are reading for this week is like Rome's own story of its foundation written 700 years after its foundation, right? It's like if America was founded in 1300 and like I was writing a history, our like history of America with very few sources to go by. And so that presents a lot of really interesting issues and some kind of problems as well with how this actually occurred. But we will tackle those today. Let's see, what else we got? Let's recap the Etruscans. I want to hear from you guys, like, what is the deal with the Etruscans, right? We started last time when we were talking about how when we're looking at Italy, at least in the Bronze Age, Italy is like, they are moving slow compared to what's going on in Greece. And Greece was moving slow compared to what was going on in the Near East. And later on, everybody catches up. But in the beginning, things are kind of, well, not very exciting over in Italy, even though Greece has some awesome stuff. But by the first millennium BC, right? Not 1000s, that's the second millennium BC. We'll say the 700s, right? The 8th century BC, Italy starts to kick into gear, and in large part because of the Etruscans. So Hunter says, right, they were really influenced by the Greeks, right? Very good. And we can see that kind of here, that the Etruscans over here, right, are just one of many different tribes in Italy in this time, right? Right in the 700s. There's a lot of different groups in Italy. And part of the takeaway from that is that there's no reason, at least way back then, that we would expect Rome to become such a big thing. We'll see how it happens. But if you were like hanging out in 750 BC in Italy, like you would probably not have your money on Rome to become like the head of a Mediterranean-wide empire. Okay, you would probably be betting on the Etruscans or the Greeks. So we've got, big influence there. Traders and metal workers, good. What else do we have? Very good, right? We've got a big emphasis on nature-based religion. That's excellent. And that's something that's actually similar to the early days of Greece as well, where the Greek gods very early on are very connected to nature, right? Zeus and his lording over the sky and throwing thunderbolts, Hephaestus and volcanoes. Later on, they kind of take these anthropomorphic forms. Various sports, very good. So all these things, yeah. And what we end up getting are politically, the Etruscans are like kind of sort of similar to the Greeks, right? Like they share this culture, they share a religion, they share a language, they share a general way of doing things, but they're all politically independent. And again, what I want you guys to be thinking of is like, what are the implications for that later on, right? When Rome takes over. All right, now, what Hunter was saying in the chat, absolutely true, right? Like, they love Greek material culture. So they see the Greeks come in and they're like, bronze armor, and they're like, that's awesome, we should have some of that. And they see the Greeks show up with their, like, vases, and they're like, that's awesome, get us some of those. And they see the Greeks show up with their, like, sweet alphabet, and the Etruscans are like, we're just taking that, and we're gonna write our own language in it. So in many ways, right, the Etruscans are adopting a lot of different aspects of Greek material culture. And then they kind of merge that with some things that are particularly Etruscan. Not that the Greeks couldn't work bronze, but the Etruscans from a very early time period have an incredible kind of aptitude at working bronze. And this is just like one of the best examples of that, the Chimera of Arezzo. If you want to hear more about the Chimera, you got to take the mythology class, and you'll see Bellerophon. Pegasus gets involved. Bellerophon's got an awesome spear with like some molten lead on the end of it. It gets kind of gory and kind of awesome. So go take the mythology class sometime, and you get to hear that story. One of the things we talked about last time was women, right? And how one of the cool kind of things is that based on the material culture, again, we don't have the texts necessary to really get into this in a lot of depth, but based on the material culture, it does look like women had much more of a role in public life in the Etruscan world than they did in the Greek world. And we see these cool things where it's like men and women, like delightful, happy couples on their sarcophagus. And then we also see women show up in other iconography, like in tombs, at banquet scenes and things like that. And in the Greek world, right, if you were at a symposium, if you were a woman there, you were a prostitute. Those are the only women at Greek symposia. If you're like at a banquet in the Etruscan world, you're just like, everybody's invited. So kind of a cool step towards equality on that front. Hunter talked a little bit about religion in his comment there, right? We can see some of the parallels, both in terms of etymologies, Uni and Juno, or Minerva and Minerva, and very early on, right, connected to these aspects of nature. And then I always have to show this slide again. I love this one so much. So the one of the main things, right, associated with ancient Etruscan religion, and the Romans adopt this as well, is this focus on the process or practice of divination, right? Divination, the kind of the practice of trying to understand the will of the gods through different things in nature, right? And so sometimes you're reading the birds, and sometimes you're looking at sheep livers, and sometimes you're looking at thunder and lightning. And somehow, right, if you have the right knowledge, you'll be able to figure out what Uni or Minerva is trying to say to you. And what we're looking at here, right, is this kind of textbook. That's a bronze diagram of a liver with Greek letters written in Etruscan, talking about what's going on with the different parts of the liver. All right. And we saw Etruscan tombs, right? These are the coolest things. They're these like little hobbit holes. They build these above the ground, and many of them, or the richer ones at least, are very highly decorated. And so when you go inside, you see these banqueting scenes, and you see sporting scenes. You see all sorts of kind of celebration, and one of the things that's led scholars to is thinking that the Etruscans have a little bit more of an emphasis on the afterlife, at least compared to the Greek world. We talked a little bit about Etruscan pottery, right? And how part of it is adopting Greek methods, right? So if you look all the way over there, you can see the kind of Etruscan version of an Athenian vase. But the Etruscans have their own thing too, right? With this bucaro pottery that's very, very overtly trying to mimic what a metal like vase or goblet or bowl would look like. And one of the takeaway points from that is that even though we mainly have pottery from the ancient world, and when you go to the museum, right, you're mainly going to be looking at vases that look like that, in the ancient world, like the most prized thing actually would have been metal. And so we can see with this kind of bucaro pottery, kind of like a mimicking of that style of vase. And then we looked at the temples as well, right? And so you can like see some similarities, right? We've got columns, we've got these kind of like triangular pediments up here. There's a little bit of a pedestal on each. We've got tile roofs. We've got some sculptures either on the pediment or on the roof itself. But we can see the differences too, right? That like in this one, the columns are just in front, that the pedestal's a little bit higher, that instead of just having a little bit of sculptural elaboration on the roof, right? These are what we call acroteria in the biz. You've just got like terracotta sculptures wandering all over the roof, and they are super awesome. So what I would expect is not necessarily that you remember exactly that this is the Portinaccio Temple of Apollo at Veii, but if, for example, on a museum is not a term. On an exam, if you got two pictures and you were asked to determine which one was Etruscan and which one was Greek, you should be able to make that differentiation. All right, so we closed last time kind of situating where Rome was. We talked a little bit about the geography and how it differs from Greece, right? We've got this like one long contiguous geographic area as opposed to like lots of little islands and peninsulas and things like that. And within that long geographically contiguous area, there aren't a ton of different barriers. And so like there is like a mountain range in the middle, but it's not that high. And you got these rivers that go throughout the peninsula, connecting everything so that you can actually sail a good amount of the way through mainland Italy. And what we closed with, right, was kind of thinking how when we think of it, right? When we're thinking about like ancient Rome, this is what comes to mind. This like incredibly dense metropolis, right? In the Empire, that's exactly what it was like. And this thing, again, is really cool. It's from that museum where it's like all replicas of different things from throughout the Roman Empire. But when we transport ourselves back to the founding of Rome, we have to think of it much less dense, right? Rome is the city of 7 hills. And we've got the Capitoline over here. And we've got the Palatine over here. And then we've got the Forum down below. And so we've got to kind of remove some of those monuments from our conception of early Rome. This area over here, by the way, the kind of undeveloped area, this is known as the Campus Martius, which in Latin translates as, anybody know? Anybody take Latin? Anybody give me a translation of the Campus Martius or the Campus Martius? At least you're paying attention to the slides, Hunter. That's good. And you're right? That is what's going on there. What it translates as is the field, right? So campus, right, where we get our word campus, like a college campus, is the field. And then Martius is the adjectival form of Mars, right? The god of war. And so that's why people were training their troops there, right? It is the field of Mars. And in later times, this gets all filled in. By the time of like Julius Caesar, there is not like a giant field there anymore. It's all filled in with all sorts of stuff. And actually, interestingly, if you go to Rome and you go to this area, the Campus Martius here, when Rome gets into the medieval period, it contracts incredibly. So like in the Roman Empire, we get like 1 million people. But in medieval Rome, right, at its kind of low point, we're down to like 25,000. Think about that, like 1 million shrinking down to 25,000. And they kind of all live in this Campus Martius area right here. And so when you go to Rome today, you'll notice that many of the places, right, are on a grid plan, an orthogonal plan. But the Campus Martius itself kind of retains this medieval fabric and kind of the cobbly streets and the twisty, turny streets, and they're very small and narrow, and the building's very tightly clumped together. And so you can still see the fact that it was this kind of medieval base after the Roman Empire. So put it on your list when you guys go to Rome. Okay, and we looked at this last time, right? We've got our 7 hills, and you can see it actually a little bit better in this, I don't know, kind of childish map here, but I like it because it highlights the hills. When you go to Rome today, you can't see the hills that much anymore. But when we conceptualize the earliest days of the city, we want to be thinking that people are living on top of each of the hills, right? Little groups of people on top of each of the hills, eventually coalescing together to become the city of Rome. All right, so that's kind of what we want to be thinking about when we're thinking about the earliest city. So let's talk through the Roman story for how this happened. Now, the story begins long before the city of Rome was ever founded, okay? So let's go back, actually, to the beginning of the course, and let's go back to the Iliad and the Odyssey, right, the Homeric epics, and the siege of Troy. And one of the Trojan princes, who doesn't play a huge role in the Iliad, but, he's around, is this guy Aeneas, right? So he's on the Trojan side of things. And in the destruction of Troy, Aeneas ends up fleeing the city. And the classic kind of story for how that happened is that he's got some tunnel that he's sneaking out from as Troy burns. He takes the sword of Troy, right? From which a new civilization will emerge to conquer the world. And then he's got his dad, Anchises on his shoulder or on his back. And then he's got his kid, Ascanius, on his leg. And so whenever you see the depictions of Aeneas fleeing Troy, you're always going to get an old dude on his back and a young guy on his leg. It's his father and his son. Interesting side note, which actually is important and is going to play a role weeks later for us, but like hundreds of years later for the Romans. Anchises is like one of the only mortal dudes, maybe the only mortal dude. He makes out with Aphrodite or Venus in the like Roman mythology. So like Venus gets the hots for Anchises and they like go make out and like she gets pregnant and she, bears this child Aeneas. And so he's the son, kind of half son, right, of a god. And then afterwards, right, like she's like, oh, Anchises, can you like please not tell anybody that this happened? And because he's probably like wanting to tell everybody, like I just made out with Aphrodite, and she's like, please don't tell anybody. It's super embarrassing. But anyway, so that is going to come back, and that's going to be really important later on. All right, as we work our way through the story of Rome. So Aeneas goes on this giant adventure, which is told in the Roman story of the Aeneid, right? The Aeneid is the story of Aeneas, and it tells the story of his travels, right? From Troy across the Mediterranean, stopping at all these different little places along the way, Sicily, North Africa, Carthage, before finally landing on the shores of Italy. Now, one of the things that we talked about at the beginning of last semester, when we were talking about the Bronze Age, was that if there ever was a Trojan War, I mean, people debate whether anything like that actually happened, but if there was a Trojan War, people kind of situate it temporally at the end of the Bronze Age, right? Somewhere right around 1200 BC. Now, that's kind of an interesting way to start our story for the founding of Rome, because the founding of Rome is traditionally dated to the year 753 BC. Okay? So we got like 4 centuries between like the story of Aeneas and Romulus and Remus founding the city of Rome. Okay, so these are kind of the dates that we're working with here, right? If there was a Trojan War and like the voyage of Aeneas, it would be something around 1200, 1150, something like that, associated with the Bronze Age. If we look at the traditional founding date for the city of Rome, we're looking at 753, April 21st. So, do we have class on April 21st? Do we get to celebrate Rome's birthday? It looks like we have class. It's a Wednesday. As long as it's not one of those reading days, we'll have some celebration for Rome's birthday on April 21st. But there's a 400-year gap there. And then our sources for writing about this, right? Virgil, writing his story about the Aeneid, is writing during this period of time, right? Over 1,000 years after the Bronze Age, and like 700 years after the founding of the city of Rome. And Livy, the guy that you guys are reading for this week, he's writing right around the same time. And then we've got another problem with this whole thing. And this only kind of becomes apparent once we get a little bit later in the course. But it's not just like this is like a fun time to write histories, right? That like a bunch of people right around this time are like, let's like write some awesome stuff about the early city. No. This just happens to be during the time of Rome's very first emperor, right? After 500 years of the Roman Republic, we get Augustus as Rome's first emperor. And he's like thinking strategically. He's like, I need to get some awesome stories out there about the founding of this city that justify Rome's place at the head of the Mediterranean and justify my ability to rule as like a sole ruler in Rome, because there had been no sole ruler in Rome for like 500 years. And so Augustus is going around like, hey, Virgil, you have some dope rhymes. Can you please write me an epic that rivals the Iliad and the Odyssey? And he's like, Livy, you're a pretty awesome historian. Go write me a history that justifies my right to rule right now. And so, not only are these written way after the events that they like mention, they're also like incredibly propagandistic. And so we have to disambiguate all these things when we're trying to figure out what actually happened. But that's kind of the timeline of different dates that we're dealing with here. And I would like, we haven't been very specific about dates in this class so far, but everybody write this down, right? Like everybody go write down, you're like April 21st, 753 BC, all right? That's one of the specific dates I do want you to remember. That is the founding of Rome. And one of the interesting things is this is also like right around the same time where Athens is becoming like coming out of the Dark Ages. So a lot of stuff happening in the 8th century BC. That's a good question now. How do we know this date? So what we do is like we actually use the ancient authors who date it by kind of working backwards with the length of time that different people ruled. So like during the Republic, it's the number of people in consulships. And then going back to the kings, it's like a king ruled for like 30 years or something along those lines. But Emma, that's a good point as well. When we say, how do we know that? It's also that like, this is what the Romans thought their like birthday was, right? April 21st, 753 BC. This is like, we didn't like find an inscription, right? Like on the ground that says like, I, Romulus, have founded Rome on this day, April 21st, 753 years before Jesus. That didn't happen. This is kind of tracing it back from later Roman historians. So even though it's a specific date and people went by that and go by that, it's not like for sure exactly when it was built. Although we'll loop back to that at the end of today. Okay. Now, how do we get here, right? How do we get from Aeneas at the end of the Bronze Age to little baby Romulus and Remus in the in the middle of the 8th century BCE, right? Well, as the story goes, when you read the historians, it's kind of biblical at this time, right? It's like so-and-so gave birth to so-and-so, and so-and-so gave birth to so-and-so, and so-and-so gave birth to so-and-so. The names aren't really important there. Just know that there is a big temporal gap between Aeneas landing on the shores of Italy and the city of Rome being founded. So let's talk about that story. So we've got Aeneas. Aeneas shows up, and when he makes it to Italy, he's got to fight some battles to establish a place for his men, like on Italian shores. And he does that by defeating King Latinus, right? And if Latinus sounds familiar, is where we get our word Latin, right? He's king of the Latins, and kind of Romulus ends up taking over that area afterwards. Now, after all those generations, we get a couple people ruling nearby. We've got Numitor, right? The grandfather of Romulus and Remus, ruling the little town of Alba Longa. And this was the best map I could find of like Rome's early neighbors. I know it looks kind of childish, but it does a good job of showing that there are lots of little towns in like the 8th century BC. So Numitor is ruling Alba Longa, and his younger brother Amulius is very, very jealous of him, right? This is the classic story of like, the older brother getting everything, the younger brother being very, very jealous. And one day he hatches a plot. And he kidnaps his older brother, Numitor. And he imprisons him. And he says, I am now the king of Alba Longa. But that's not enough, right? He takes the daughter of Numitor, a woman by the name of Rhea Silvia. And he's like trying to think of like, how can I prevent any sort of retribution or vengeance from this? And he's like, the daughter probably isn't much of a threat, but we don't want any male offspring. So I'm going to make her a Vestal virgin, right? And so he makes her part of this kind of religious priesthood, right? She's a priestess of the goddess Vesta. As part of that, she's not allowed to have relations with any guys, thus can't have any kids. But as the story goes, somehow she ends up pregnant. Now, the penalty for breaking your vow of chastity as a Vestal virgin is to be buried alive upside down. So Understandably, that's not a very attractive outcome if you happen to get pregnant. So Rhea Silvia comes up with a plan. And she's like, it was the god Mars. I did not sleep with any mortal man. It was the god Mars. He got busy with me, and now I'm pregnant. You can't blame me for that. It's the god Mars. Now, when Amulius hears about this, right, he's kind of coming to look after to find the kids, right, the offspring of this union between Rhea Silvia and Mars, and she's got to get them out of there. And so what she ends up doing is she kind of pulls an old Moses move, right, where she takes the little babies and puts them in a little reed basket and floats them down the river, right? So she's just kind of putting them into the hands of the gods. And as the story goes, it's the river god of the Tiber River that ends up saving them. And as they kind of eventually float down and down, they get caught up in this shallow part of the river where it's kind of marshy and these reeds sticking out. And there's a big bend in the river there. And so they wash up on shore. And there they are found by a wolf, which you think would be really, really bad, right? And in particular, it's this female wolf or she-wolf that in Latin, the term is a Lupa. Oh, and Isabella, yes, they are twins, right? So Romulus and Remus. Romulus is the older of the twins. Remus is the younger of the twins. And Juliana, yeah, if you're a twin, you're like in good company with Romulus and Remus. Okay, so they're found by this she-wolf, and rather than eating these tiny little babies, this she-wolf actually starts nursing them. And so this is one of the most famous kind of sculptures from the ancient Roman world, where you've got the she-wolf, right? And then you've got the little tiny babies, Romulus and Remus, being suckled by the she-wolf, and that's how they kind of grew up in their earliest days. Now, one of the most interesting things about this sculpture is that it turns out none of it is ancient at all. And so for the longest time, everybody knew that the babies were Renaissance babies. They were like, okay, these little bronze babies, they don't look Roman, they don't look ancient, they look like little chubby Renaissance babies. Everybody knew that, right? Obviously. But everybody was like, okay, this bronze like statue, this totally looks like an Etruscan piece of metalworking. And so what they thought, right, is like it's a Renaissance addition to like an old Etruscan statue. And what ends up happening after they actually test, I forget actually what the test is that they use, but they somehow tested the wolf statue as well. And it turns out that that is just medieval. It dates to like 1200 AD. And so the whole thing has nothing to do with ancient Rome, even though when you go to the Capitoline Museums in Rome, it's prominently displayed. And it's one of the most famous like kind of statues associated with ancient Rome anywhere in the world. Now, one of the interesting twists here is that the word lupa in Latin is also the word that they use for a female prostitute. And so part of the story, or one of the interpretations of the story, is that it was also a prostitute that found the children, and she's the one who actually ends up helping raise them, along with this guy, the farmer, Faustulus. And so one of the interpretations, right, is somehow they were married, but she had to work as a prostitute, and she found the kids, something along those lines. But good old Faustulus, right, he raises the kids and feeds them and makes them strong and healthy, and when they reach a certain age, they go back to depose their evil great uncle Amulius and restore the rightful king in Alba Longa, their grandfather, Numitor. And they do so successfully. They make Numitor the king of Alba Longa. Now, what you'll have noticed is that nowhere in the story so far do we have Rome, right? Rome doesn't exist yet. The only thing that exists is Alba Longa and all those other little towns. And so what they do after this is they decide, as a sign of thanks, right, to the river god for like saving them and to the Lupa, they go back to that place where they washed ashore. And you can see it in the map here, right? So Alba Longa would have been upriver here. They float down the river this way, and they wash up right around where there's this little island and bend in the river. Right? That's where it gets kind of shallow because of the island and the river. That's where they wash up. And they decide they are going to found their own city at that place. Now, they start talking about it, and they're like, oh, this is a great place for a city, right? We're near the river, we got all these hills, this is awesome. And this is where the story starts to get kinda weird, right? So Romulus is like, this is a great place, right? Especially this hill, the Palatine. But his brother Remus is like, well, this is a great place, but to be honest, the Aventine is really the hill that we should be building on. And they start fighting about it. Remus is like, well, I just saw 6 birds fly above the Aventine Hill. That must be the one, right? That's a divine sign that the gods want us to build there. And Romulus, as the older brother, of course, is like, well, I just saw 12 birds fly above the Palatine, so that must be the right hill. And so they can't agree on this thing. And they're just like, whatever, we're going to start each building our own cities. And they start doing that. And one of the first things you do when you build a city is you mark out the sacred boundary, right? You kind of like dig a little ditch, which is eventually where the wall is going to be built. And that's kind of the sacred boundary of the city. And so they do that first and start kind of building their walls. And one day, for whatever reason, Remus hops over the wall of Romulus, whether it's to check out the Palatine or to fight him or whatever it is. And Romulus kills his brother because of this. And he says afterwards, right? Like, this is going to happen to anybody who crosses the walls of Rome, right? They will die. And so that's why we call the city, Rome instead of Rheims. But that's how we end up with the city of Rome. Poor Remus. No more Remus. So Romulus kills Remus. It's going to happen to anybody who comes over the walls of Rome. Kind of a dark day in the early history of the city. Okay, so according to these ancient historians, right, the day that we want to associate that again is April 21st, 753 BC. And what we're looking at is the Palatine Hill. That's the original one. And what's kind of cool here is that the Palatine Hill, where Romulus first started to build his city, that's actually the hill later on, 700 years later on, when we get emperors, they build their palaces on that same hill. And actually, that's where we get our word for palace, right? We get our word from palace from the Palatine Hill. And the Italian word like palazzo and stuff like that all derives from that Latin word. Now, one of the other super cool things is that, right, what we've been talking about so far is the kind of mythological history of the founding of Rome. But one of the other ways that we can approach this, right, is archaeologically. We can actually go look for what the earliest remains are and date those in different sorts of ways. And when we do that, one of the super cool things is that the earliest remains, the earliest actually habitation remains, you get some earlier burials from like the 9th century, but the earliest places where we actually have houses actually is on the Palatine Hill, right? Out of the 7 hills, it's on the Palatine. And one of the other cool things is that, like, when we look at what those look like, they look very similar to the kind of evolution of the ash urns that we get from the Etruscans. And so this is like a little urn, cremated ashes would go within there, but they look like houses, right? They're literally houses for the dead. And when you look at this, right, we've got cross beams that support the roof, and then you've got like some sort of wall that surrounds it. And what you're looking at here is the same kind of thing, right? We've got some sort of kind of trench where the outer wall would have been. You've got some sort of post holes in here that would have held up those cross beams, that would have held up the roof. And when you reconstruct it, it looks pretty darn similar to what you're getting in the Etruscan region at that time. And then these houses, they actually end up dating to like a very, very similar time to the mythological founding date of 753, right? Like these date to roughly the 8th century. So was it 753? Nobody really knows, right? But it's kind of cool that the archaeological remains actually, support roughly that kind of time period as the founding date for the city of Rome. So let's go ahead and do our attendance for today. Attendance is green for today. I don't know if Heracles is looking sick or whatever it is, but go ahead and put green in, and then we will get started in just a minute. I couldn't wear a green shirt today because if I did, I would disappear into the background, and then I'd just be like floating head and hands trying to lecture, and that'd probably be really creepy. All right, so let's go ahead and look at Romulus as the first king of Rome. So 753 BC, Romulus becomes the king of Rome, and he's the first of 7 kings. Hunter, yes, that's a great question. So Romulus is descended, right? So after that long descent, it's like Aeneas, and then is the great grandfather of Numitor, and Numitor is the father of Rhea Silvia. Rhea Silvia is the father of Romulus and Remus. So they are related. So you don't need to remember all the different names of the kings of Rome, right? I'm not going to ask you what years did Ancus Marcius rule. But I do want you to kind of get down the idea that they kind of have these 7 kings. Now, one of the things that's weird is that this monarchy, right, the monarchic period, lasts for almost 250 years over the course of 7 rulers. And historians are basically there's no possible way there were only 7 kings. From our perspective today, it's way too few. Any single king could rule for 30 or 40 years, but there's no way that you have 7 kings in a row that all rule for 30 or 40 years. It just doesn't happen. So what we see happening with the Roman historians who attribute, their history to these 7 kings is these are kind of serving as kind of almost prototypical kings, each of who contribute something to the Roman people into the city of Rome. And so we'll see that with Romulus, one of the things he's contributing is how to be a good, powerful Roman. And the next guy, Numa, is going to contribute how you be a pious, religious Roman. And then the other guys, they all contribute something to the city of Rome. And so while there probably were many more than 7 rulers over the course of 250 years, these kind of all embody some part of kind of the development of the city and the people of Rome. So for Romulus, the thing to remember is this guy is a warrior, right? After taking over, what he starts to do is, to the best of his ability, start conquering other small towns. But this is difficult at the beginning. So at the beginning, Rome, the way it gets people after they founded the city is they're taking basically the outcasts of everywhere else, right? So they'd be you got some people who were, thieves or murderers or whatever. Sure, come to Rome, right? Rome will take you, no big deal. But one of the things that ends up happening then is that it becomes, in its earliest days, a city of all dudes. And they realize this problem that, like, you know, as awesome as their city might be for one generation, it's only going to last one generation unless they do something. So what ends up happening from there is they end up emailing out, right, to all their neighbors, and they're like, hey, can we have some of your women too, so that, like, our city can, like, procreate and flourish? And the neighbors are like, absolutely not, you cannot have our women. There is no way. And so what Rome does, and what Romulus does, is he decides to hold a party. And he invites the Sabines, which is another one of the local groups. You can see them up here on the map. So he invites the Sabines, and the Sabines show up for the party, and, you know, they're all having a great time, right? Drinking some wine, Rome's showing off the new city and the new buildings and all that cool stuff. And then at the given moment, somebody gives the sign, right? Like some sort of horn blast or something like that. And at that moment, these Roman soldiers come creeping out, and they steal all the women. And this is a kind of event that we call the rape of the Sabines, right? This actually comes from the Latin word rapio. So it's not like they were stealing women and having their way with them right there. In Latin, it kind of more means the seizure of something, right? So it's the seizing of the Sabine women here. And the Romans take the women from the Sabines, and then they kick all the dudes out and they shut the gates to the city. And so this is a very awkward sort of way to start found your city, I guess. And one of the things that ends up happening is that one of the things I want you to kind of think about is the role of women within this, right? On the one hand, they're being taken as objects here. On the other hand, we're going to see that they play a very powerful role in kind of this early founding of the city. So one of the things that kind of happens next then, right, is a little bit later, the Sabines come back, right, with their army. And they're like, give us our women back. And the Romans are like, no. And then they start fighting. And they're like killing each other. And it's the women who jump into the middle of this battle. And the women are like, hey, cool it, guys, right? Look, you guys are our, like, brothers and our fathers, right? Talking to the Sabines. And she's like, you guys are our new husbands. We're sticking with this. So cut the shit, quit fighting each other, and just act like men. And so they are actually, like, you know, at first kind of objects in this whole thing. And then they're the heroes of settling the kind of battle between the Romans and the Sabines. And actually in the aftermath of this, they come to an agreement where it'll be Romans and Sabines alternating rule in the city of Rome. So Romulus is a Roman, the next ruler will be a Sabine. Now, Romulus is said to have been taken up into the clouds, right? They were making a sacrifice, a big storm comes, all of a sudden Romulus is gone. And so he never really technically dies, he just kind of becomes possibly one of the gods. Now, what we'll do is we'll start next Monday. Now, on Friday, we'll talk a little bit about the other kings. And then we'll also start by kind of reintroducing or stepping back into our story of the, well, not story, but our project for the semester. So just to get everybody on the same page and looking forward, you still got quite a ways until that's due. But I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page there. Okay. Oh, we did start Monday on the Ides of March. So we get the Ides of March and we get the birthday of Rome this semester. That's fantastic. Look, everybody, have a wonderful, wonderful couple of days. I will see you back here on Friday. And I hope that you don't get taken up into a cloud like Romulus before then. All right. Bye, everyone.